Welcome. Welcome back, I should say, and good evening to the fourth session, the final session for today. The panel 4, another perspective of Serbia, Southeast Europe, and the transatlantic stability and prosperity. We have an excellent panel this evening, whom you could see on the screen, and about 90 minutes to cover a lot of ground. So if you've been watching today, you know the ground rules, and those ground rules will remain the same. We'll start with opening comments from all of our distinguished speakers for about 5-6 minutes. Then we'll go ahead and have some conversation, the opportunity for the speakers to interact with one another, and we'll proceed for the 90 minutes to talk about this very important subject. I'm going to go ahead and we'll go through the order of the speakers as they're listed in the agenda, starting with Mr. Mark DiPaolo, Director of Defense Capacity Building Directorate at the Operations Department in NATO. Then we'll proceed to General Ben Hodges. How you doing, General? Currently at the Center of European Policy Analysis and former commander of the United States Army in Europe. Tremendous amount of expertise in Europe. Ambassador Lazar Kamenescu. How are you doing, sir? Member of the Scientific Council and New Strategic Center in Romania and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania. Goran Svilanovic, sir, welcome. Former Minister of Foreign Affairs for Serbia and Montenegro. And then finally, His Excellency Ratko Vlajkov, the current ambassador of Bulgaria to the Republic of Serbia. So with that, I'd like to just take a couple moments to address some of the polls, the polls that were conducted by CEAS, presented earlier in this conference. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but what I'd like to do is focus on a couple things that I think will help us during our conversation. It's no surprise, we talk about this a lot, that attitudes towards NATO in Serbia remain rather negative, and that has not changed much over the years. This isn't a huge surprise. Most Serbs are not excited about joining NATO. Just over 50% have a, 54% I believe it was, have a negative attitude towards the organization. However, when you ask about the cooperation between Serbia and NATO, while there's only 14% that are positive, I think 47% are neutral. I think it's not too much to be a little optimistic and argue that there's some opportunity there. There's some opportunity to change attitudes and perceptions. And finally, when we look at the question, what's the source, not including the media, do you use to get your information about NATO? 31% talk about family and friends, it's 7% government, 5% NGOs, but 41.3% say they're not informed. So we could look at that two ways. We could be a glass half full or glass half empty. If you're a pessimist, you might argue that we're not doing our job in discussing the importance of NATO and the relationship. But I would argue that the fact that there are so many that are not informed is a tremendous opportunity. And with that, I'd like to open the discussion about the transatlantic community, future stability and prosperity. Mr. DiPaolo, please.
So good evening, everyone. We are the last event, and it's great to be here with the community that cares most about transatlantic relations and NATO relations with Serbia. So my name is Mark DiPaolo. I know some of you, but not all of you. I manage a portfolio of civilian programs for defense reform and capacity building with NATO partners, including Serbia. And I'm sure that you've already heard several NATO speakers throughout the day emphasize our view that a strong, stable, and democratic Serbia is important to the stability of the Western Balkans region. And so the stronger the cooperation, the better for both Serbia and NATO. And I'll talk about that in particular, and that's where I'll put my focus today, is on the practical cooperation. So Serbia voluntarily joined the NATO Partnership for Peace in 2006. And for the last 14 years, we've grown our practical cooperation. And I have to say, it is a two-way street, very much so. NATO provides advice and support to Serbia in the areas of military interoperability, defense planning and reform. There are a lot of science programs, crisis management, and many other areas. And at the same time, Serbia contributes to international peace and support operations with the EU and the UN. And by the way, it's in some pretty tough areas, you know, Central African Republic, and I think they're in Somalia and some other tough places. So, you know, Serbia is doing hard work, and we feel like that's a return on the investment that NATO and others have made, and certainly that the Serbians have made. Serbia has also worked with NATO and allies to train Iraqi civilian and military medical personnel starting back in 2017. And that was at a moment when NATO really wanted to get its presence in Iraq reestablished, and Serbia helped us do that. Right now, with the drawdown of U.S. forces in Iraq, we're very well positioned to help contribute to stability there too. And that was also with Serbia's help. So we give and we get, and I think that's how a partnership should work. I'll give you one other specific example that's quite interesting. Serbia and NATO are working together on a program called DEEP, or the Defense Education Enhancement Program. The DEEP program helps partners reform and improve what they teach and how they teach it in their professional military education system. Serbia's system is pretty well developed, actually, but they're looking to the challenges of the 21st century, and they want to sustain their ability to adapt their system. And so they're working with us on that. In return, by the way, Serbia has contributed to similar NATO efforts in the DEEP program in other countries, such as Armenia. So it's a mutually beneficial exchange, and Serbia makes similar contributions to NATO's Building Integrity program for good governance and anti-corruption as well. They've helped us in particular in Armenia and in the Kyrgyz Republic. So again, it's a two-way street. Continuous practical cooperation builds trust and connectedness, and it creates a cascade of other benefits, some of which you can't predict. Let me jump quickly back to DEEP, that education reform program, for a quick example. So in the Czech Republic, they have a place called the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Defense Institute. And that institute is working with the Military Academy of Serbia, and they've been cooperating since 2017 as part of the NATO DEEP program with Serbia. Last March, when the pandemic really hit, this cooperative relationship made it possible for the Czech Republic and Serbia to very quickly join forces to respond to the lack of protective equipment for the pandemic. And by the way, that cooperative event was highlighted in many Serbian media outlets and on the front page of the NATO website. So NATO and Serbian staffs interact regularly on practical cooperation. We think we get mutual benefit from it, and that's extended also through NATO's military liaison office in Belgrade. As well, and I should point out, there's a long-standing and very solid professional working relationship between the Serbian Armed Forces and KFOR, and that's NATO and Serbia working together in practical ways to ensure stability in a region that could get out of control if we let it. So, all in all, NATO and Serbia cooperate on about 100 partnership activities per year. It was interesting to note when I read the Serbia 2020 survey results, they were really interesting. from CEAS, I saw that Serbian citizens' positive views on cooperation and partnership with NATO, in other words, the practical dimension, are 2 times as strong as the support for NATO as an abstract organization. So if you ask about NATO in general, there's a lot of skepticism. If you ask about the practical cooperation, there is less skepticism. Those of you that have the report in front of you know those numbers are very low, by the way. The positive views are quite low. We need those to come up, but the message is clear to me. Real practical cooperation helps people understand NATO's intentions, and it builds trust, and we need to build on that. So very quickly, and then I'll hand it back to you. I should say a word about the recent decision taken by Serbia to temporarily suspend defense-related cooperation activities with its partners, and that's all of its partners, not just NATO. First, NATO respects Serbia's decision. We hope we can resume cooperation as soon as the suspension period has ended, but we understand why they did it, and we understand that it wasn't targeted at NATO. And I also want to emphasize that this suspension has not affected at all our political dialogue and even our military dialogue, but we're just not planning activities. And we're in regular contact, including through the NATO Military Liaison Office in Belgrade and through the Serbian mission to NATO. So the communication continues. And our KFOR mission, with 3,500 troops, will continue to help sustain a safe and secure environment in Kosovo in line with its UN mandate, and will maintain its operational contacts with the Serbian armed forces as required. And I think that relationship is good and professional. Serbia participates in about 30 different science programs with NATO, by the way. So those are completely separated from military capability development. These are academicians from all countries coming together to work on hard problems. And those include energy and environmental security and defense against chemical and biological and radiological threats, cyber defense, human security, and many others. So the cooperation is significant. NATO is appreciative of the cooperation and the collaboration because we feel like we receive just as we give. I hope that both sides, I do think that both sides are ready to resume the defense-related cooperation as soon as it's possible, presumably in March. We're already looking towards an upcoming cooperation program for 2021 and 2022 and the planned NATO-Serbia exercise next year. So I'll close with this. Relationships and partnerships are never static things. They're dynamic, so we're all remaining flexible. And I expect that our cooperation will continue in due time. We'll make up for any delays and continue our productive work. So thanks very much, and thanks in particular to CEAS for pulling this together. It's a real honor to be here with the colleagues in this panel.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent comments. You said practical at least 5 times. I stopped counting at 5. But I think that's actually extremely important, because the practical aspects about stability and prosperity are what affect people in their daily lives. And that's maybe a strand that I'd like to pick up over the course of this conversation, because you also mentioned the practical cooperation is more popular. So how do we focus on the practical, change attitudes and perceptions, and affect people's daily lives in the process? Let's think about that as we go through this conversation. General Hodges, I'd like to turn it over to you. It's good to see you.
Hey, John, and same here. And what an honor to follow Mark DiPaolo. I loved his emphasis on a practical, realistic approach, and also, frankly, I thought it was an optimistic approach and positive approach as well. Before I go any further, I have got to say how proud I am of Jelena Milic. She is an incredible person, and she's Yeah, she's also a very courageous person, and I think her team and what CEAS do to pull together this NATO week every year is important to keep people focused on the future versus living in the past. And so my hats off to Yelena and her team to do this. It's not easy. Obviously, having NATO's PDD and others to support it is critical, but every mission needs a leader, and that's Yelena. So I'm grateful to have a piece of this. So I believe that this is the era of great power competition, and I believe that great power competition prevents great power conflict because you have to compete in all domains: diplomacy, information, and economy, not just military. And when you compete in diplomacy, when you compete in the information space, when you compete in the economic space, not just doing exercises in security co-op, you are conveying to your potential adversaries that this region, this place, it matters, that we are committed, that this is important to us. And that actually lowers the risk of a conflict because then the potential adversary doesn't make the miscalculation that the West doesn't care, the US doesn't care, NATO doesn't care, whatever. And when we fail to compete, as we failed to compete in the Caucasus, then the Kremlin fills in. As we failed to compete in Ukraine until it was too late, the Kremlin fills in. Or the Chinese will fill in. So that's why we have to compete in the Balkans. The Balkans, not only because it's a part of Europe, but it's also the back door to the Black Sea region, which I think is the real cauldron of competition between the West, the Kremlin, and the Chinese Communist Party. And Serbia, obviously, is the most important country in this Balkan region. Now, I think it's also every participant in this region has legitimate historical grudges, complaints, concerns, and interests. But as I can remember when I was a young officer in 1995, I was the aide-de-camp for SACEUR. The SACEUR was General George Jowen at the time. And this is when the Dayton Peace Accords were being sorted out. And I used to hear him tell everybody, all the participants, he said, you can learn from the past, but you cannot live in the past. And I think that's what we've got to do as we go ahead. So let me just briefly touch on diplomacy, information, military, and economy. In terms of diplomacy, I think the West has got to give leaders in Serbia and in Kosovo, in Belgrade and Pristina, give them some space. If it was easy, this would already be solved. We wouldn't even be having this conference tonight. Give those leaders some space to be able to talk, to no red lines, no lectures, give them space so that they can do the negotiations, the trade-offs, to think through all the hard things that have to be done. And I think the United States and I think the EU have a responsibility here. No lectures, no red lines, give them some protection because there are so many outside influences that do not want to see any positive development here. There are unfortunately countries as well as people that benefit from the continued chaos and, or maybe not chaos, but unresolved issues. For sure, the United States has got to coordinate with the European Union. I'm very proud of our embassy team in Belgrade, our ambassador. I'm very proud of the fact that this administration has worked hard to try and break some of the log jams, but there's no way we can do this alone. The European Union holds the key to success here because they hold the key to economic and Western integration. So this is an ideal situation where the United States and the European Union have got to work together. In terms of the information space, I think it's important to say that Serbia of 2020 is not Serbia of 1999. We're talking about 2 decades down the road. And people should think about Serbia in the context of the current time not what was going on 20 years ago. And I would say also, obviously, the United States of today is not the United States of 2 decades ago, nor is the rest of Europe. So we need to address the issues as we face them now, not what it was 2 decades ago. I think it's important in the information space to call out some of the bullshit fake news that's out there. And I'm talking specifically about this depleted uranium narrative that is a complete fake news story. It's been debunked over and over and over by experts, yet somehow this still has legs and somehow people still believe it. And I think that we have a responsibility, and leaders in Serbia have a responsibility to shine the light on that. There's no point in continuing this false story that that keeps a wound open. I believe that the Kremlin uses the Orthodox Church as a weapon. This is not new, of course. I mean, even in the time of the czars, the church was one of their arms for achieving their strategic objectives. And I think we need to be honest about this and not be afraid to call it out. The Kremlin has zero incentive to see resolution of any of the issues in the Balkan region. It serves their strategic purposes to see the Balkan region continually at unrest and unable to integrate with the West. Why is it that they continue to blame NATO? Why is it that they continue to drag down Serbia's or hinder Serbia's future? In the military domain, this is a challenge. And look, it's every nation's responsibility to protect their population, and it is the right of every nation to align themselves or not align themselves, to purchase the weapons that they want, what they think they need. And I think actually it was a courageous decision by the Serbian government to put a 6-month freeze on all exercises. I mean, that gives them a way to maybe soften the blow a little bit when they canceled exercises with Russia. But I think that Serbia has to take a hard look at themselves and decide, do we want to be the Venezuela of Europe, where we have no other friends, we have no other partners, that we only align ourselves with Moscow, which is what Venezuela does. Obviously, nothing good has come of that for Venezuela. And frankly, Armenia. I think today, many people in Yerevan are saying, we were betrayed by Moscow. We were abandoned by Moscow. Is that who you really want to be your principal security partner? Finally, inside the military space, the KFOR mission. I am so proud of our great alliance that we have continued, all the nations of NATO have continued to sustain the mission of the KFOR. I can remember when I was the commander of U.S. Army in Europe, I had senior leaders in Albania and senior leaders in Serbia at the same time both tell me, please do not withdraw the KFOR mission. Please do not pull KFOR out. It is so important. It is the only anchor of stability in the region. And that's remarkable because it's actually a very small number of troops, just a few thousand troops. That's nothing compared to the cost of what would happen if NATO did not demonstrate through the example of its soldiers being there, that commitment of so many nations to trying to help provide hope for stability and security in the region. And one last thing, I've known General Simovich now, the chief of the Army, for several years, and I think he is a very good leader. I think he's doing his best to lead Serbia's land forces, and he's also respected within his own army. I remember seeing some Serbian soldiers at an exercise in Hohenfels, Germany, and I went up to them. They were very fit, well-equipped, disciplined, and I said, hey, you guys mind if I take a picture with you? And they said, yes, sir, of course. And one of them had around his neck one of these Arab scarves, which a lot of soldiers who serve in the Middle East, they like to wear the scarf around their neck that kind of shows, hey, I was in Iraq or I did something like that. And I said, well, my friend General Simovic will love this picture. And immediately the sergeant who had the scarf took it off very quick because he knew it was not entirely appropriate for the discipline of the uniform. But I laughed because it showed me that they respected General Simovic. And to have somebody like him who's got so much experience at the head of the Serbian land forces, I think is important. And then finally, this is my last point, economy. When we talk about competition in all domains, diplomacy, information, military, and economy, the best chance for Serbia, the best chance for young women and young men in Serbia, the best chance for them to want to stay in Serbia and see their country grow is Western integration, is the opportunity for investment, the opportunity for jobs, the opportunity for improving infrastructure. Several steps have been made. The mini Schengen, I think, is a wonderful idea, but clearly the United States has got to cooperate with the EU, but the EU holds the key here. Serbia has to live up to EU expectations, but I think all of Europe benefits, not just young people of Serbia, if we are patient and persistent. And of course, we have to compete with China. I mean, nations are looking for help on infrastructure, and the Chinese will step in immediately if they see a vacuum. And I think it's to our benefit that we don't allow that vacuum to exist. Thanks, John.
Thank you, General. You covered a lot of ground. And I hope to come back to a number of your points during the course of the conversation. The importance of history, not to be driven by history, but to learn from history. And too often on both sides, I think maybe we look at our relationship through the lens of the 1990s. And how do we get beyond that? How do we deal with that in a way that does, as you say, provide space for leaders in the region to operate in a way that's not conflicted by the baggage of the past. With that, I'd like to turn to Ambassador Comenescu. Sir, the floor is yours.
Okay, do you hear me?
We do.
It's okay, yeah. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And let me start by thanking the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies and Jelena Milic for kindly inviting me at this 8th edition of the Belgrade NATO Week. I feel particularly honored to attend such an event and to be part of this panel alongside most distinguished speakers. Before anything else, I would also like to highly commend the Center for organizing this conference, despite the fact that it is not that easy at all to organize such meetings, important meetings in the current circumstances which are still being generated by the pandemic. Now, coming to the task of our panel, and taking into account the time constraints, I will try to be as concise as possible and limit my considerations to only some aspects which seem to me to be the most relevant for the topic under discussion. First, an observation, my first observation is that when considering the security, stability, and prosperity prospects in one particular region, in our case, Southeastern Europe or Western Balkans, there are several angles from which that could be done. Few of them seem to me to be the most relevant. First is about the view from inside the region, including perceptions about the role of each of the countries they form, and of course, the relations among those countries. Second is the view from neighborhood, especially the direct neighborhood. And third, the relevance of the region for the global actors, be they individual powers or international organizations, like, of course, in our case, especially the European Union and NATO, and vice versa. I will limit my comments on this third aspect, and particularly on the relevance for the Western Balkans for the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance. And of course, on the relevance of the two organizations for the countries in the region. Before doing that, I find it appropriate to point out that when looking to the picture from any of the three angles I mentioned, and with due consideration to each of the countries in Southeastern Europe, the place and role of Serbia are of particular importance. No need to elaborate that much on that. Already the speakers before me highlighted the importance of Serbia. Now, back to NATO, the European Union, NATO and the transatlantic links. First, the European Union. The fact that all the 6 countries in the region have as top priority, as their top priority, EU accession, speaks by itself about the relevance of the European Union for them. On the other hand, I feel the need to stress that the full integration of the Balkans into the European Union is not only in their interest, but also it's an absolute necessity for the European Union itself, including in terms of its own security and particularly as well its capability, I mean the European Union's capability to act globally. No need to elaborate on that, but just to, if we look at the map of Europe, and we see also if we look at the increasing competition regarding the region among important non-regional actors, Russia, China. So it's self-evident how important it is for the Western Balkan countries to become members of the European Union. And in spite of that, I think that everybody will recognize that the process so far has been rather slow. Okay. And we see that 17 years after the Thessaloniki strategy, still no country from from Southeastern Europe is member of the European Union. Well, there are, however, there have been, as of late, some developments which I would say generate cautious, be it optimism. I'm referring to the fact that in March this year, North Macedonia and Albania started negotiations, accession negotiations. I'm referring as well to the Berlin process. And yes, I'm also referring to developments with regards to the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. That being said, I also want to underline the fact that from both sides, I mean the European Union and each of the countries in the region, there is need for doing much more. The candidate countries themselves need to upgrade their efforts, both individually, in terms of rule of law, avoiding illiberal temptations, but also in the framework of a regional cooperation. This cooperation can and should be intensified. I'm referring especially, looking at my old-time friend, Goran Svilanovic, to the RCC, and projects like the Common Regional Market, or as it was mentioned here as well, the mini Schengen. One particular point still on each of the countries in the region, and directly related to that increasing competition among global actors, which I was referring to. It is important for these countries, as candidates, as preparing for the accession to the European Union, to align, to associate themselves with positions, decisions by the European Union, especially when they are targeting EU's role as a global actor. Regarding the European Union side, the need is there for continued and even much more substantial action in support of the countries in the region. That requires, inter alia, in my opinion at least, that the European Union clearly be aware of the fact that deepening of the European Union, as some member states speak as being the top priority, and in a way placing as a secondary objective the enlargement, this is not the right approach. Deepening of the integration, internal integration of the European Union and enlargement, these two processes can and should go simultaneously. And well, secondly, still on the European Union, I think that it is important for the EU and member states to encourage to the maximum possible the involvement already from now of the countries in the region in EU existing projects. I'm referring be they regional or EU-wide. The 3C initiative, for example, which is consisting of only EU member states. I think this is a project where countries from the Western Balkans could be and should be in a way or another associated. Just to mention one point which I very much like, I heard in a previous meeting, General Hodges speaking about the importance of the Danube as a logistic and transportation link between the Adriatic and the Black Sea. And I should add also that, you know, the only piece missing in a highway between the Adriatic and the Black Sea is the roughly 100 kilometers of known highway between Belgrade and Timisoara. So these are projects which should benefit of a much more substantial support from the European Union. And that brings me to the role of the countries, members of the European Union, in helping, rapprochement of the Western Balkans to the European Union. And here there is one point which I want to stress. It seems to me that, I'm looking into the past experience, including the very recent one, I think it's appropriate for the EU member states neighboring the Western Balkans. I know that there are sensitivities. I know that there are still pending issues, but the approach should be from the EU member states be that the approach to those pending issues to be a constructive one and not a kind of, let's say, means of preventing or generating difficulties for getting the countries closer to the European Union. Thirdly and finally, a special role the EU member states, I mentioned. Now, my last comment is about NATO and the transatlantic link. One particular important aspect is that progress towards EU integration of the Western Balkans needs to go hand in hand with the preservation and further strengthening of the transatlantic link. Need is there, of course, of taking into account that the approach of the countries in the region towards NATO differs of that towards the European Union. There are 3 of them are already members of NATO, while the other 3 may not seek or have not yet the prospects to join. But as Mark Di Paolo said, and I fully subscribe to this, I think that there are practical opportunities for cooperation between the alliance and the countries in the region. And by the way, the fact that in spite of what has been happening since 99, the fact that there is a functioning, and I would say efficiently functioning, NATO liaison office in Belgrade speaks by itself. And that's something which, again, as General Hodges was speaking about the fact that there are opportunities, and we have to look into what the future may offer to us, all of us. Finally, and well, definitely my last comment, it is extremely important that a real synergy exists between NATO, European Union and NATO, and respectively the European Union and the United States in their approach towards the Western Balkans. The way EU and NATO have developed their cooperation in the Western Balkans indicates that there is a solid base there too, but equally plenty of room for better doing. That being said, I have reasons to be optimistic. If I look at the messages coming from Brussels and also from across the Atlantic, from a new administration which is being shaped in Washington. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's good to end your conversation on an optimistic note. You covered a couple of interesting themes, I think, that we'll hopefully pick up on during the course of the conversation. Primarily that we can't look at the discussions of the Western Balkans in a vacuum, and who better to understand that than their Southeast Europe neighbors. So with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Goran Sviljanovic, please.
John, frankly, I think we should offer a floor to Marko Čadež,
I'm sorry,
who
I was
is
just...
presiding Chamber of Commerce of Serbia, but is also a driving force behind the mini Schengen. Therefore, I think that I'd be very happy to speak after his presentation, because this is the real life and it's happening currently. So, Marko, if I may, you take the floor and I'll second you.
Thank you for saving me. Please, sir.
No, thank you very much, Goran. Thank you also for all the hosts to invite me and to speak a little bit about the latest initiatives to bring this region closer to each other, closer together, and to establish something what we called single regional markets of West Balkan 6 countries. The basic idea behind that, you can call it mini Schengen, you can call it Initiative for Four Freedoms, or whatever you want to call it. But basically it is the idea of bringing economies together with a clear view of having scale-up economy, having economy which size is possible and actually sustainable to grow, and to be to be the entity which is ready to contribute to the European Union and not to hamper the European Union. There are two sides of this story. The one side is, let's say, bringing the region together, which means how to solve the agreement so that we really have one regional market, that we really offer to the businesses to work and to operate in environments which allows them to work anywhere in 6 countries. And this is something where we are approaching and we are moving forward with different initiatives. One of them is, of course, the broad border crossings, paperless customs, mutual recognition of documentation, which is like phytosanitarian, veterinarian, or work permits that we actually established to have synchronized, which means that actually the work permit from Serbia is recognized in all other countries and vice versa, which allows to move people and labor very quickly. On the other hand, to bring or to join on the merge of financial markets, because only that way our companies and our economies are interested for the foreign investors. I'm talking about financial investors, because we are actually too small, each one of us, to be really interesting, or let's say above the radar for investments. We have huge amount of foreign direct investment in Serbia. We have now growing foreign direct investments in the region, but still we are not there where we can say, yes, we are selling the region as the region of success and of opportunities. And this is, I think, the best way how maybe you can understand it from your perspective is if you had 20 years or 15 years ago Baltic space or region, if you had a Visegrad space or Visegrad region, the next big thing is the West Balkan region, and the economy is growing very fast. So there is at this point no better return of investment than to invest in this region. We are witnessing it every day. So Serbia, for example, gained just last year more than 3 billion euros of investment. This is like all other countries in the region together, and this is something which is really positive. Also, in that respect, it is very important to move and to push our governments, and that is what we as a business communities from the region are doing. We made one regional chamber of commerce. We are representing more than 400,000 businesses. We established just, I think, 2 weeks ago, Business Council of West Balkan region with 16 biggest regional companies. It's the companies which have all together joined. They have about 3 billion revenue and employing about 40,000 people in order to communicate directly with the governments and directly with the European Commission. The second part of the story is, of course, to move Brussels and member states to change approach in assessing or enlargement approach towards the Western Balkans. So we are asking to be treated as some part, as an existential part of the European economic area, which we are. Our economies are so connected. We are all exporting more than 80%, all of countries, more than 80% to the EU. Our factories, our producers are mostly from the foreign direct investments are from the EU. So basically, we know what are the perspectives. So basically, what we want to do is to move Brussels to say, okay, let us implement whatever the countries in the region synchronize with the EU, wherever they are checked the list, so wherever they are, we implemented the EU standards. Let's implement this immediately and not wait after we are in the full membership. This means that Europe says openly that yes, this is a part of European economic area and this is a part of future Europe, and not treating the region as some country like, I don't know, Egypt or whatever, which is Brussels more or less doing now. So basically, this is the idea behind one common regional market, the idea behind the initiatives for the business community. There is also the clear standpoint about business community about Euro-Atlantic integrations. There is a clear standpoint from the business community that, on our point of view, a membership in NATO means stability. The membership in NATO means economical growth, and membership in NATO means something which is very, very useful for all our economists. What we are not really, let's say, satisfied to see is this decoupling from NATO membership and Atlantic integration, from European integration, that what we have seen in Northern Macedonia, for example, or in Montenegro, is that one approach is not necessarily helping the other approach. It has to do with the political problems in the European Union, and that is something where we need support and we need to talk with the member states. So this is something what we are working very, very hard, and our plans and our ideas and our papers are now cruising in Brussels, but also in the most important member states in Germany, in France, and in Italy. And we are also talking with all our governments. So the governments in Pristina, the governments in Belgrade, and Skopje, and Sarajevo, and in Podgorica. Now we have the most advanced initiative, as we call it, mini Schengen initiative, with 3 countries: Northern Macedonia, Albania, and Serbia, which is moving forward with their agreements, with our agreements between 3 of them, and we now are trying to also motivate others and other 3 to join this initiative because they're already part of the regional initiatives like Berlin process and so on. So we are complementary with the existing initiatives, but we have to move faster. We have to push for the political support and to be aware that nobody will do that except we alone do this. So this is not something which has to come from Brussels, has to come from Washington or from wherever. It is something what we need to do on our own. I would like to thank also Goran, because he made great work as in his mandate as Regional Cooperation Council, but he's now more on our change the sides from the public administration to the private sector and helping us really a lot as somebody who is working closely with me and the people and the businesses in all the region to push this initiative from, I think, the most healthy, let's say, background, because in the economy there is a really clear motivation. So we have to start with joint interests. You cannot start the business if you don't have a joint interest. This joint interest is mostly making good business operation, making money, making profit, and growing. So this is something what I think is a healthy way of bringing the region together, but also healthy way to say to EU, do you really want your economy to be strong? Do you really want to help your industries, because your industries are part of our economies and huge part of our economies, or do you want to ignore that? So that's from my side now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marko. Goran, and thank you for having him speak before you, because I think now your comments will become even more relevant.
Yeah.
So if you
John, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I'd like to express my gratitude to Jelena for the invitation, but more than that, for the perfect lineup. I'm so happy to see Marko, of course, but I'm happy to see Lazar, with whom I really enjoyed working together years back. Ben Hodges, who spoke excellently well, and I really appreciate his supportive messages that he has shared with us. But also, I've never met Marko, you, as well as you, Ambassador, but I highly appreciate the incoming engagement of Bulgaria as a NATO contact point. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is not easy, as I think Ben and Lazar have mentioned, to organize consecutive several years this kind of event. I'd like to continue on what Marko was just explaining, and would also like to come back to what you were guys saying about the security. So I'd like to link this economic cooperation, which is really booming, with what else is being done already in the field of security cooperation, so that we can discuss the further ideas. Well, to try to help understand those who might be mixed with this idea, we are saying common regional market, well explained by Lazar, and Marko is mentioning now Mini Schengen as initiative. So only several days back in Sofia online, though co-hosted by North Macedonia and Bulgaria, a summit in the context of the Berlin process, 6 economists have agreed, there is a political declaration, they have agreed on forming common regional market. There is an agenda, there is an action plan, there are 20, 30 pages document which is referring to this regional trade area. They have agreed, all 6 economies. They have agreed on a free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. They have agreed on regional investment area, which means to align investment policies with the EU standards. They have agreed on regional digital area to integrate the Western Balkans into the pan-European digital market. And finally, on the 4th pillar, they have agreed on regional industrial and innovation area, all 6. But then the 3 that Mark was referring at in the context of so-called Mini Schengen initiative have agreed to go even faster and to make all of these steps quicker and more concrete, as we've started with practical steps in the introductory presentation, including yours, Mark Di Paolo. So this is just to understand what is this. So we have everyone on board on a common regional market, And we have 3 who are even faster in this respect and are calling themselves we are part of the mini-Schengen initiative. So the task of the Regional Cooperation Council was to include everything already agreed into this paper, which is called Common Regional Market, but still there is room to go faster. And I think, therefore, this message should be heard from those who are still hesitant whether to support mini-Schengen or not. Basically, they have agreed on every element. Now they need only to consider agreeing on being quicker in implementing, particularly in the field of trade, all of these measures. So this is just to understand what is it. So this was a great success and a great work done by the leadership of the Regional Cooperation Council. Then I'd like to say that there is already an infrastructure which is in place when it comes to security cooperation in the region. I mean, besides NATO, etc., European security discussions. On the regional level, we have already developed SENSA, so-called Southeast Europe National Security Authorities, which broadens this cooperation on the NSAs beyond the 6 and brings together Romania, Bulgaria, so our immediate neighbors are also at the table. Many of them, both the EU member states and the NATO members. There is CIMIC, Southeast Europe Military Intelligence Chiefs, another security platform which goes beyond these 6 and brings the immediate neighborhood, meaning the countries who are both the EU member states and the NATO member states. And there is a lot of cooperation in the field of military intelligence, which you will agree is a sensitive area. So this is already there. And then there is a huge step forward, recently done, with the full support of the European Union. And this is called Integrative Internal Security Governance, IISG, which is now, since months back, under the chapeau, again, of the Regional Cooperation Council. And there are 3 important pillars. So this is really security cooperation in the region. One is Western Balkans Counter-Terrorism Initiative. This is one of these pillars. Another one is Western Balkans Counter-Serious Crime Initiative. And the third pillar is the Western Balkans Border Security Initiatives. So this is already financially, logistically sponsored by EU and brings all 6 together and is embedding them into security cooperation run by the EU. So I just wanted to share this information with you to see how this regional cooperation in the field of economy is also directly linked with the regional cooperation in the field of security cooperation. So I think that we have to go hand in hand. So we have to continue both regional economic cooperation and regional political and security cooperation. I mean, all of these decisions, and Marco was really instrumental in many, would have never been possible unless there was a strong leadership and understanding. Okay, we have a political will, and let's make it practice. Let's implement these political ideas. So this is all happening. Of course, there is one big issue, and this is outstanding political problems in the region. These issues need to be addressed. We have seen a marvelous development in the context of the name issue being resolved between Greece and North Macedonia. Great step forward. And I believe that this regional, both economic and security cooperation, will also provide a fertile ground for the leaders from the region to agree on other outstanding issues here. So I'd never be negative on this. I'm actually very positive. But for that to happen, I think that the invitation should really go around to those who are still skeptical whether to engage or not. And believe me, I think this is a big must. I was part of the government which was deciding of extraditing to the Hague Tribunal chiefs of staff, former chiefs of staff, and former presidents. These were very difficult decisions. Frankly, perhaps even today, not really supported by the majority of people. But this is called political leadership. It was possible, and I think those who are now hesitant to engage in this kind of a cooperation with international tribunals, they would need to think twice, and they would better decide positively, no matter how challenging this is, because this kind of a cooperation will provide really for a possibility to speedy this political process on the outstanding issues, which will then really make us somehow more positive when it comes to also complex issues regarding the security cooperation in the region. So let us be positive and let's be clear. I think that several speakers, Ben, you insisted on this and I'd like to fully support you. We're clearly saying there has to be a joint venture which brings together the EU and NATO. So the transatlantic cooperation is needed, and let's also be very open. There are partners, I think this was also mentioned, so there are other geopolitical players, so let's try to refine our engagement with them, because there is room to cooperate with them, but that leadership must be clear, and this leadership should come from our Brussels partners. Here I'd like to stop and would be very happy to continue really exchange of views regarding all of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Goran, and thank you for making that connection between economic cooperation and the important steps that have been taken in the economic field with security cooperation. And I think that's something that we could discuss a little further. But before we do that, I'd like to invite our final speaker, Ambassador Vlaikov, if you would like to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, of course, congratulations to Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies and, of course, Jelena Milic. I'm in a very difficult situation now because I was listening very careful the first panels in the afternoon. I was watching and listening very careful to debate now. And I would say that the most of the ideas I wanted to speak about, they were mentioned. But in the same time, I'm very satisfied. I'm very satisfied because we are speaking clearly one and same language and looking in one and same direction. This is, of course, very, very good. I will start probably that I have the advantage to be ambassador of neighboring country first. Second, country member of EU and NATO. And I will use what Ambassador Comanescu said, that from 2003, from Thessaloniki Declaration till today, no one country from Western Balkans is a member of EU yet. We are speaking about NATO, but I'll start with EU because I see the connection between both. And I want to say, and I'm sure everybody of you knows that from during our presidency, in the first half of presidency of the Council of the European Union, in the first half of 2018, Bulgaria succeeded to convince the member states, the European institutions, to have again in our agenda of EU the issue of enlargement with the Western Balkan countries. I'm very satisfied that we succeed to convince our partners, because it's very important to have the full Europe in EU. This is very important, and thank you again, Ambassador Comanescu, that he mentioned this during the Romanian presidency. This line continues, the Croatian presidency, and even now. And I'm very satisfied because this focus of European Union to Western Balkan countries, started with efforts also of my country, is very important for these countries, not just for their development and for their European path, but also is very important about the relations with NATO we are discussing today. And I want to say that, and it was mentioned many times, that during our common presidency with the Republic of North Macedonia Berlin process this year, it was also one step forward in these efforts for connectivity, the countries in the region from one side, and from other side, connectivity between the countries from the region with other part of Europe and especially of European Union. And I would say that we are very satisfied that one of our main priorities was connectivity, and the connectivity now we are very satisfied to see the new ideas. When we are speaking about connectivity, we are we have many directions of this connectivity: economic, infrastructure, energy, but also connectivity between the people and between the young people, etc. Probably we'll discuss some later the issue of public opinion, and for me this is very important. But I want to continue that this is our very successful presidency of European Union, because the focus is again on Western Balkans countries, and Serbia, one of the biggest, as the biggest country in this region. Now we continue also, as Mr. Svivanovic mentioned, from 1st of January 2021, my embassy with the contact point of NATO in Serbia. For first time, Bulgaria will be contact point in Western Balkan country, and I'm very satisfied with this. And we have already perfect cooperation with the NATO liaison mission, and especially with General Tommaso Vitali and his staff, and we are preparing very careful. In this preparation, for us is very important to have and to discuss the expectations of our Serbian partners. This is very important, and in the next day we will have a lot of meetings to see what is important in this regard. And now I'm coming slowly to the issue of NATO. For me it's very important, not just because of this issue that will be a contact point next 2 years, but it's very important to have one new understanding in Serbian society about NATO. It was mentioned many times. I think Mr. Ben Hodges spoke a lot about this, that we have now another Serbia as 20 years ago. This is very important. We see all these positive changes. And I want to say something else. Serbia is going to European Union. We have very regular negotiations. A lot of chapters are opened, and we are discussing now new chapters to be opened. But I want to mention that the values of European Union and the values of NATO are practically absolutely same. This is democracy, this is rule of law, human rights, good neighborhood relations, etc. That's why if Serbia and the other Western Balkan countries are accepting the values of EU, it's absolutely natural to accept also NATO and the values of NATO, because as we know, they are practically the same. And that's why for me, speaking about NATO and Serbia, is very important how the politicians, how they will explain this connectivity between the values. This is very important. And I was very impressed in the previous panel about the figures in this pool. We see that 54% of the Serbian population, that they have negative opinion about NATO as organization, but 33% they have negative opinion about the cooperation between Serbia and NATO. Here we see this difference of 20% is speaking a lot. And this is the big reserve to change the public opinion here. Because it's not possible to have, yes, it was very interesting during the previous panel, the deputy chairman of Committee of for Foreign Policy in Skupština, she mentioned very clear that Italy, for example, is our very good partner in EU, and Italy was one of the countries which took part in the events in 1999. And it's very important to see this difference and this development in the understanding. And I would say that probably for us it's very, very important, for us, I mean for member states and for our partners here, is very important to go together and to work with the public opinion. And I will say very briefly how it was in my country. In beginning of the changes, it was so the word NATO was practically forbidden, like here. Mr. Svivanovic knows very well Solomon Passy. Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was member of the parliament in 1990, and it was great National Assembly, and he mentioned for the first time the word NATO, and that we have to apply for membership in NATO. It was in 1990, and in the same day, it was statement of his group in the parliament, of his party in the parliament, that it was personal opinion of Solomon Pasi. And a few years later, in 1997, we started already. We applied for membership. It was also, it was not consensus in the beginning in Bulgaria, but few years later, we came to consensus, and it was probably so very, very interesting, or how to say, paradox, that the leader of the party, of Socialist Party, who was against NATO and very active in end of 90s, he was the president who signed the treaty for our full membership in NATO. And I'm giving this example with my country because it's very important to have consensus between the politicians, and to have consensus between the politicians and the society. And we absolutely respect the military neutrality of Serbia. This is absolutely clear. And in the same time, we support, of course, the cooperation, and we are working for more and more cooperation. Thank you I think Mr. Marco Di Paolo spoke about these figures about this cooperation, and they are very, very interesting and very important. And we want, during these 2 years, when my embassy will be contact point in Serbia, we want to make this cooperation more and more and more practical. And the people, they to understand the sense of this cooperation, because it's very important here that the people in Serbia, the society, to know that NATO is also an organization which is very useful for the people. And we have in our agenda, and we already discussed the concrete events we'll work on. We are working on natural disasters, accidents, and research. It's very important. It's very important to work about the training of journalists, and to support so the knowledges, and to give knowledges of journalists, they to explain through the media how NATO could be useful for the people, and the people to see the benefit of this, and the benefit is mutual, because this is also development. Last point, probably, I hope we will speak about the public diplomacy, which is very important, and it will be part of our efforts in these 2 years. And one of them, we have to have cooperation and to explain this cooperation on the best way. And for me, it's very important how the NGOs will work and how we will cooperate with NGOs. We have concrete ideas. We have already concrete efforts on this, and I'm sure we will continue. I'm ready to take part in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's very difficult to go last in a group of such distinguished experts, and it's even harder to be the last speaker of the day. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with a question to you as a little bit of a reward for putting up with that. And it's actually going to be a question for everyone. I think you talked about the processes, the importance of the process of changing attitudes and perceptions. And that's really important to understand that it's a process. These things are not going to change overnight. I think we played practical bingo this evening, and each and every one of you spoke about practical aspects of the relationship between Serbia and the Euro-Atlantic community. And I want to come back to that. Because Ambassador you first spoke about the necessity of integration of integration of the Western Balkans for the EU. General Hodges talked about the importance of its location as a key to the Black Sea. I'd like to ask you from Bulgaria's perspective and then from Romania's perspective, how do we look at this from that practical perspective and integrate Serbia beyond the Western Balkan Six, keeping in mind Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Greece are all part of the Euro-Atlantic space. How do you play a role in integrating not just the Western Balkans, but specifically Serbia? Ambassador Vykov, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you for the question.
Well, I understand that in a way the question is put forward to me as well.
Yes.
So in my introductory contribution, I was referring to the importance, the angle, one of the three angles which I was referring to was about the role of the EU member states or NATO member states, direct neighbor to the Western Balkans. And well, for me, okay, first and foremost, I think that we can help the countries based upon our experience. Yeah, we can help the countries in the region to find the best way to prepare for membership, be that membership of the European Union or for those who so wish of NATO. And there is one point which I want to make. I mean, when I say that help them in preparing, I am not necessarily referring, and believe me, I was directly involved in Romania's drive towards membership, both in NATO and the European Union from the very beginning to the end. And I think that one important thing is to learn about what was wrong. I'm saying that because I'm looking now in the case of my country. Even now, I mean, 13 years, almost 14 years since we became member of the European Union, there are still things which could have done and should have been done before the accession, so as to be able to benefit to the maximum possible of the status of a member state.
Right.
So this is one aspect which I want very much to stress. And secondly, as I mentioned, we are all countries here, I mean, a part of some important projects inside the European Union, for example, but which is also, when we come to infrastructure, for example, there you may see the link also with NATO. So these countries like mine and all the other, let's say, directly neighboring the Western Balkans, should work more so as to involve these countries in European projects. I mentioned already the two of them, the CSI, and now very important as well is the EU strategy for the Danube region. Serbia is part of is a riparian to the Croatia is there, Hungary is there, Romania is there, Bulgaria. So I think that all these countries associated Serbia with us should be a little bit more lobby in a stronger way towards transforming the Danube into a real east-west transportation and logistic access. Just these two examples, and of course we can go further on in sharing the experience of ours in terms of membership of NATO, and what I pretend that for Romania, but other countries as well, I think that we also can provide, let's say, expertise or knowledge about how and what to do and to contribute to the strengthening of the transatlantic link via a stronger integration of the countries in the Western Balkans into the European Union, and also into security-related aspects, which do not necessarily oblige to become a member of NATO so far. But I think that sharing experience in this would help also for the future when things, sensitivities, inertias may be overcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Going back to Ambassador Flykov, again, you talked about the process of changing attitudes of perception, and you mentioned near the end of your discussion public diplomacy, the importance of public diplomacy, the fact that the Embassy of Bulgaria or the government of Bulgaria would like to focus on that. Is that something you'll be taking on, you think, as a contact point embassy? And maybe you could unravel that a little bit, maybe expand on the role of NGOs in that effort.
Thank you. They will be not just the efforts of my embassy. We have common efforts, of course, with the NATO liaison mission in Belgrade and with the member states, of course, and very important with our Serbian partners. I mentioned many times the need, and I'm sure it will be a very useful cooperation with our Serbian partners. And we have to work together on this to change somehow, or slowly to start to change the narratives in Serbian society about NATO. It was mentioned many times that the trend is positive, the trend is visible, but we have here one difference between the view of the politicians, the view of the people from civil society, and probably the results of the polls. Here is some gap, and we have to contribute this gap to be cancelled. Speaking about public diplomacy, I have in mind that we have to work in direction to have more and more trust. And what have I in mind? We have one of the biggest problems in last 5-10 years, not just here in the region, but in Europe, but probably in the world. It is the hybrid war. And we have a lot of problems, even in Bulgaria, member state of EU, of NATO. We have very close cooperation between European Union and NATO about fighting with this hybrid war. And really, we have now in Bulgaria, for example, and not just in Bulgaria, a lot of channels which are with sites which are just with fake news, and they have with small letters written there fake news, but the people, they don't know. We have the same problem here in Serbia. And speaking about public diplomacy, we have to present the truth. We have to present the real situation and to help somehow for fighting with these different examples of hybrid war. I fully agree when we spoke about the third factors about this competition here in the Balkans. I think Mr. General mentioned this. I fully agree with this. It's real competition. And this competition is not just in economy or some in security, etc. This competition is also about the people who work with the mind of the people and who make these people so manipulate in one or other direction. That's why I think that the responsibility of the politicians here in Serbia is very important. They to work on this, and I'm sure we have a positive trend, I hope. Probably the most important is not to look in the past, but to look forward, to look in the future and in the future cooperation. We have now new Skupština in Serbia, we have a new government, and we have the situation in this Skupština that there are no parties or members of parties which are against the European integration, against the European Union, and it was in previous coups, many years ago. And this is a big chance. And this is a chance to work, as I mentioned, to work to convince the people about the values. They are the common values here in Serbia, values in European Union, values in NATO. And having in mind the combination of all these factors, slowly it will start to the public opinion to be changed. And I will repeat once again, for me it's very, very important the role of NGOs, of civil society. This is something what was very, very important in my country, in Romania, in other former communist countries. Very important was the building of civil society, the support which the NGOs became from EU, from NATO, from United States, from different sources. This is probably the way how easier to go to the mind of the people. This is very important. And speaking about hybrid war, this war is about the mind of the people. Mm-hmm. And here, having in mind the past 20 years ago, and so the propaganda from other political forces which are not so active now or not in the parliament, it's very, very difficult to work on this. That's why my opinion is that public diplomacy has to help to present the people the real situation, to present the advantages, to present what is useful for them. That's why, as I mentioned, and I'm finishing with this, in next 2 years we'll work together with our partners from NATO as a mission in Belgrade and with partners here from Serbia. We'll work on this to present the people the practical use of cooperation with NATO.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You touched on a couple of important things. The importance of trust, the importance of not living in the past. And I want to turn back to General Hodges. Sir, you talked about this as well. This was one of your major points. In addition to the fact that we need to give space, not lecture. But I want to turn a little bit to the lens of the 90s. You know, we have, again, the ambassador talked about truth. The truth of the matter is the 90s, I believe, was an aberration. So how do we get to a point where we're not so bad, so this piece of history is not so much baggage, and we could get beyond, if that's possible? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So I don't understand, well, I do understand, but I think it's a terrible decision to have this destroyed building in the middle of downtown Belgrade that was struck by NATO back 2 decades ago, that this collapsed building is kept as a monument. I'm not sure what good comes from that. You know, in the middle of Berlin, of course, they have the old Gedenkniskirche, the church that's there. But that's a reminder to themselves of their terrible past, of the Nazi past. And so that church is kept as a memorial. The church, the old MOD building in Belgrade, is kept as a reminder of how Serbia got screwed over by NATO. What possible good comes from that? And I think, you know, the Danube River is another example. How does Serbia benefit at all from the Danube River today? Really not, except for the occasional boat full of our grandparents that comes on a tour. The economic potential of the Danube River is probably not even 10% of what it could be. And there's no pressure on Constanța in Romania because Russia prevents Georgia from becoming the portal between East and West. So there's the traffic that could be coming across the Black Sea into Constanța is not there. There's no pressure on the Danube then to expand. There's no pressure on nations to to do the work that's required to keep it deep enough, even during times of drought. The management of it is terrible by the organizations responsible for it. And yet Russia still has a seat on the Danube River Commission. I mean, I love maps. I'm an old person. I like to have maps. I've got my map here, and the Danube River does not touch Russia anywhere. Why? Why is Russia still on the Danube River Commission, and that Russian, German, and French are the three languages of the Danube River Commission? It makes no sense. So hopefully one day, young people in Serbia will get sick and tired of this, and they will say, we want a future, not staring at a destroyed building and not have this albatross of the beautiful Danube hung around our neck because people don't care.
Thank you, sir. We're coming up on the end, but I'd like to give Goran, Marko the opportunity to make a couple minutes each, closing remarks, focusing on the practical steps forward from your perspective. Please, Marko, if you'd start, and then Goran, if you don't mind.
Well, frankly, I think Marko is not online at this moment. He sent me a message as there is something pressing. I would actually like to continue what you've started, Lazar, and what Ben has now pointed out in more detail, the Danube.
Okay.
It is one unused potential in every respect, not only for Serbia, but for many countries. I guess you are all aware that the longest part of the river, Danube, goes through Serbia. And then I would actually like to somehow go around the whole issue of NATO security cooperation. I mean, I was proudly defending my country during the NATO bombing. So therefore, I feel free to discuss all of these issues with every sensitivity in my heart and in my mind. Therefore, I'd actually like to use the existing 3Cs initiative and bring really boldly the Danube as European and Euro-Atlantic resource. When I say in every respect, I mean the water, I mean economic cooperation, and of course, I'm now pointing out the need to organize also models of security cooperation. That will make it easier, including for Serbia, to engage. Because these are the neighboring countries, these are the EU member states, these are the NATO member states, these are our economic partners, this is our life, and this is our freedom. So, well, this is something that I think is underused. When I say underused, I have in mind Danube as a macro-regional strategy. The money was never put into it. All of those who are coming in this panel, like Ambassador Ratko and Lazar, both are aware that the EU deliberately launched the macro-regional strategies, but deliberately decided not to put real money in them. Pity, because I think this was one of the avenues which could have been used in a better manner. Now we're referring at Danube macro-regional strategy. I think more could be done, because this would bring all of us together and would make it easier for everyone to engage, including in the security formats of cooperation. So 3Cs and the boldly developed security cooperation along the Danube, being aware this is the economic heart of Europe, could be one of the ways to increase engagement of Serbia in cooperating with many NATO member states. Thank you. This was my last 2 cents, guys.
Thank you, Goran. And Mark, I'm sorry for adding a vowel to your name, but I'll give you the last word, please. Thank you for waiting patiently.
No problem. And it's dreadful to be the last speaker. I've learned so much listening to all of these gentlemen, so I don't deserve to sum up, but I'll be super brief. International relations, economic success, The currency for all of that is trust. And trust is something that happens in the cognitive domain. And so strategic communication can be important, but the first maxim of strategic communication is that deeds must follow words. And that's why I put my emphasis tonight on practical cooperation. And I would suggest to all of the listeners here, just like I suggest to my staff back at work and to the other colleagues I work with, there is no shortcut to this. We're going to have to just day in and day out advance, and sometimes we'll screw up, and sometimes Serbia will screw up, and we got to be flexible and just continue to advance. We'll build the currency of trust, and I think that's how we connect the practical with the economic. So thanks, and thanks again to the Center for this really remarkable event.
Well, thank you. That was actually an excellent wrap up. And as Ambassador Vlikov said, this is a process. Mark, thank you for emphasizing that, and we will continue. And with that, I went over a few minutes. I apologize, but this is the end for today. We start tomorrow at 3 o'clock, so we'll see you there. I want to thank Yelena, the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies, and it's I'm sitting here under the hot lights, but there's a lot of people you don't see that are making all this happen, and it's not easy. I know that. Anja, all your crew, thank you guys very much. And with that, good evening. See you tomorrow.